I've been fond of saying that the biggest risk, frankly, to the planet is assuming somebody else is going to save it. Because you have to do something. It just gets started somewhere. I don't have the answers. I'm not sure any of all of us, rather, I'm not sure we have all the answers. I'm not sure who does. But I know that I can do something. So this year, we've introduced a effort or brand that we call Birkebeiner Green. And Birkebeiner Green encapsulates our efforts at the Birkebeiner around sustainability. And there's 5 areas we're focusing on. I'm going to talk about 2 that are relevant because the race is coming. So we've done 2 very significant, I hope very significant things. If you've done the Birkie or seen a picture from the Birkie, we give everybody a bib, we call it, that has your race number on it, along with your chip so we can time your race. Those in 48 years or 47 years have always been made of a virgin fabric. Yes, I'm embarrassed by that. This year, for the first time, that bib will be made from a American-made fabric that's 100% made from plastic water bottles. We don't have plastic water bottles in front of us here. But for 11,000 skiers, and it's almost 6 water bottles per bib, it's 70-ish thousand water bottles every year going forward that won't go into a landfill. Okay, it's 70,000 water bottles. There's 70,000 water bottles on the street out there right now. So is that going to change the world? No. But it's a start, and we hope that by us doing it, everyone listens and sees it does something as well. Second thing that we've done going into this year's Birkie, which is 3 weeks away, we do things that we can't fix at the Birkie. So to groom 50 kilometers of ski trail, we use a diesel-powered piston gully. There's no such thing as an electric one that will do it. We have to put snow down on the street, and that is a bunch of diesel dump trucks and excavators that have to do that. So we recognize there are things we just can't change. So going into this year's race, we are offsetting all of that effort for the month of February. It's only 1 month of the year. We've got to start somewhere again. But we're offsetting that through a company called Climeco. And it goes to a wind farm in South Dakota that is changing where that energy is being produced to renewable energy. But what's really important, I think, that's only 1 month and it's only our little effort, is we're inviting all of those 11,000 people through a calculator that we commissioned on our website to offset their travel to the same project. And again, it's sort of another statement I've stolen from elsewhere, which is, small hinges can swing big doors. So do something, I think, is the answer. I don't know where to go next and what the next thing is to do to fix it, if it can be, but I know you got to start somewhere and start picking some things off. And if you're interested in Birkebeiner Green and what we're doing with that, you can find all the details on the website, and I'm wide open to anybody that has more ideas.
My next question is, you mentioned that you're POW athletes, you mentioned that the sports that you participate in, what's the sort of point of leverage that you have in that role and the things that you do athletically to sort of push that message forward? What's that sort of pocket of influence that you're working on in your own work to do something around climate?
I'll take that one. So we were just having this conversation, I think yesterday afternoon, about how sports are fun. They're not necessary for human survival or for the survival of the planet. And so there's this real paradox of the snow is gone, or there's a wildfire and my race was canceled. But and I refer to these as leisure troubles, where we have real climate and environmental and humanitarian crises, yet we want to do our activities that are really important in our lives and improve our quality of life and our passions. And so I think the important role that athletes can play is like pulling the outdoor community and the outdoor industry in and saying like your quality of life matters and we can all contribute to like the climate solutions. And it does take some vulnerability to put yourself out there and say like, I care about this race. I trained for a year for this race, right? Like I care about this community that I'm part of that makes my life better. And just setting an example of like how positive our sports can be in how we show up as humans.
Yeah, I would just like to kind of add on that as athletes, we are recreation athletes. We're just going out into our environments and playing and having a great time. And a lot of my friends and people are very focused on just skiing, and they're not, they didn't have the farming, the late nights of working to make these connections. And when it comes around to needing to vote for people, they sometimes don't have these connections to get out there to vote or who to vote for. They don't know where their stances are on certain things. But then when you can make that connection that some people are trying to protect these areas that you use, these areas that we love, these areas that are meaningful, once they realize that their vote actually impacts that, all of a sudden they do stand for something. And Protect Our Winners does such a great job at aligning these outdoors enthusiasts. What they coined as the outdoor state is a group of outdoor athletes that is actually bigger than any state in population. And so if we band together as people that like to cross-country ski, fish, whatever, mountain bike, and come together, we have a voice. And it's these voices that are so important for people to hear that it's worth protecting these places. And so as an athlete, and it's difficult because you get a lot of people telling you that you're an athlete and you're not contributing, you're, adding to more resources. And that is true, but we're also human beings, and this is what we dreamed of. And figuring out how to have that balance and how to do it responsibly, and getting together with people to have your voice be heard, no matter how big or small. It makes a difference.
I think to that point, one of the figures that stuck with me, it might be a little bit off, but the outdoor industry was just starting to be measured as a part of GDP starting like 2016. Before then, there was no sort of measure. The first measures came out and people were like, no way, this doesn't make any sense. The outdoor industry in that first measure, and it's kind of fluctuated around since then, in terms of consumer spending, is larger than the pharmaceutical and auto industries combined. It's a massive industry. I mean, you're talking about everything from, of course, motorized sports to silent sports and those sorts of things. But there is power within that, and there's also, those market signals can drive companies. This question's for you, Katie. When we were talking about sort of what is New Belgium's position within this as a medium-sized company, you can't drive the market, but there's also opportunities to leverage change. And I think that's been one of the things in sort of looking at that change. What has that been for you? What is that? Yeah, give us a lay of the land.
Yeah, staggering stats. When you start to add up like little voices, right, and all becoming one big whole and mattering to a lot of people, whether that's, for their fun hobbies or their livelihood or whatever. But then, a kind of disempowering stat is that 70% of the carbon emissions in the world come from 100 companies. So, I think we all have this individual duty to speak up and say something and do something, and there's an important role for that. And at the end of the day, the power exists within very few people's hands to really help turn this ship around and avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. And so I think for us, we've been doing this work for quite a while, for the last 30 years that we've been in business, and we were the first company to commission a carbon footprint study for beer. We were on the committee that helped to test out and give feedback on the global greenhouse gas accounting protocols. We're trying to find these ways, right, to help companies measure and understand what their impact is so they can grasp the gravity of it and then turn around and act upon it as their responsibility to all of us. And so we've done quite a bit of work, but like you said, Lynn, at the end of the day, we're only a medium-sized company. We're probably really quite minuscule in the size of the world. And so what can we do to make our splash ripple and to help draw attention to those bigger decision makers? And so we've created tools if you go to drinksustainably.com, there's actually a little tool where you can see which of the global Fortune 500 companies have a real climate plan. There are plans, there's data, there's protocols. A company can measure it and make a commitment and make the investments and prove that they're doing it now. And they can show you their receipts for it. But today, only 63% of global 500 companies have that climate plan. So you can go to the website, you can send a tweet to them or reach out. But then we're looking for any other point of influence that we have. And so we brewed Point of No Return to draw attention to the fact that most cities that have hosted the Winter Olympics will not be able to host the Winter Olympics in the coming decades because they won't have the right temperatures. And so if that's, we're asking the IOC to mandate that anyone who's sponsoring the Olympics has a climate plan so that they're not acting against their own interests in that. And so you can head over to pointofnoreturn.com and be a part of signing that letter and pushing for things like that. And so we know that the Olympics have actually been major catalysts for change across the world on many topics, socially as well. And so we're okay, cool, that works for our brand. It's unique, a unique button that we at Fat Tire can push. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll do more campaigns like that. We hope anyone that has a voice to kind of push on the lever can go and speak to those who hold the greatest power, which, in this case, are the companies sponsored, rich enough and powerful enough to sponsor the Olympics, right? And so just looking for any and every opportunity we can to get more corporate accountability. Natural Capital Partners did a study that is on our drinksustainably.com website, so you can go see who's doing this and who's not, and reach out to them. And I will say that your voice really matters as a customer. That's something I've seen change quite a bit over the last couple of decades I've been in this work, is that people used to say, oh, this is a fad, customers care about it now, but they're not going to care about it in a couple of years, and nope, it's not been a fad. For decades, consumer interest in supporting brands that are doing this work has just continued to grow and grow and grow. And so at this point in time, when you call a company, when you tweet at them, when you put pressure on them in any way, that, your voices are adding up, and they're also seeing purchasing behaviors favoring companies that are taking action. So as a citizen, as a customer, you have a real impact that's being heard and noticed in unison among big decision makers, and that's what's driven the 37% of companies that have, global 500 companies that have committed to climate action in a real measurable way. That's what's pushing them. It's the way you're showing up in the marketplace, the way you call and leave voicemails at their customer service line, or send an email, or tweet at them, or whatever. So it really, really does make a big impact, and we're seeing that now. And then I think the last thing I'll say too on that note is just, mirroring what Mike said about voting. There have been numerous times throughout American history where our country has come together and said, let's protect our shared prosperity. We went through the Great Depression and the Dust Bowls and World Wars, and we came together, we created policies, we created subsidy programs, and that's what helped to protect our vitality and our global leadership, and we have done amazing things as a country. And so climate policy is not political, it's survival, it's thriving, it's our quality of life as Americans, and we're not doing enough in that regard. And so I think Protect Our Winters actually has a resource where you can go see the elected officials, your senators and House reps, and what they are doing to support climate policy. But if we do not coordinate at the national level, we will not make it through this. Like, you know, it's good to go push those companies because we can start that action right now, and there's no time to waste. And we're really going to need that broader national coordination to move at the aggressive level that's needed over the next 8 or 9 years to truly avoid the largest impacts of climate change. So especially as a company, we're out there sharing the business case for climate action to senators and House reps and others. And we, you know, your voice matters, athletes' voices matter. The cacophony of cases for why we need to act on this is really important to be shared at this time.
Let me open up to if there's questions in the audience. I'll come to you if you have one. But is there anyone jumping at the bit wanting to ask any of our panelists a question?
So the question was, can I explain regenerative agriculture and how does that impact the climate? So most of us are really familiar with the idea of sustainability, which is like not getting worse. But the idea of regenerative is to improve. So it's really a ratio between extraction or devastation and regenerating. So regenerative agriculture really is based on a few different core pillars, which all look different in different ecosystems because every ecosystem faces different challenges, whether that's soil or water or biodiversity related. So some of like the key pillars of regenerative agriculture are keeping the soil covered. And this is something that I mentioned earlier with soil erosion. So through regenerative agriculture, keeping live roots in the ground, keeping animals and plants in the same ecosystem working together. And then also understanding the context of the farm itself. And this is where it gets really tricky to create baselines because each farm and each ecosystem and through each production method has like a very specific like nuance that they're dealing with. But ultimately the goal is to sequester carbon. So soil is, you know, soil holds carbon, and every time we like cut down an acre of forest or till up a grassland, we're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So our grasslands, our soil, our forests, these are huge carbon sinks. And so there's, the more acreage we can have in regenerative practices, the more that's going to tip us in the right direction. And so it's really exciting through agriculture and reforestation, and even the ocean captures carbon for us as well. But we can make really huge strides really quickly if we focus on soil. And so with the type of agriculture that Mike does, which is perennial agriculture, which is trees which grow over decades, this is a really good example of holding carbon in place because the soil isn't disturbed. So I don't know if you on your farm talk at all about the regenerative practices that you have, but I think that perennial orcharding is an excellent example.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right that we don't really face some of the major issues that you might, or people that have to replant every year. We actually just took out a cherry block where the trees were over 40 years old. So we're not, the conversation's there, and there's tons of things we can improve our practices, and it's ongoing, and we're working with top researchers and people to make sure we're continuing to get better and keeping the soil in the ground.
The way that relates to beer, if you're holding a can or a bottle, your number one source of carbon emissions is your container. If you're holding a glass of beer, draft beer, your number one source of emissions is barley. And so our second largest source in a can or bottle is from barley growing. And you think about that, like that was surprising to us when we first did this study back in 2008. We're like, wait, farming, nature, this is good, right? But you're tilling, you've got tractors, and when you till, you release all the carbon in the soil, you kill the soil, to a point where it actually it reduces its ability to sequester carbon and act in its healthy way. And if a barley farmer adopts the practices that Jonnah was speaking to, they can actually sequester more carbon than they emit, and they can become the heroes of the climate movement. And those practices are real and they're measured. And what we're hearing from the few farmers that are starting to adopt regenerative agriculture practices, which again, then they suddenly are erased entirely, or even contributing in a positive way to our carbon footprint, then what we're hearing from them is that as their soil quality builds, the health of their soil comes back to life, that they're actually seeing greater resilience. So in times of drought or other pests, that they're not having the same crop loss that their neighbors are having, and they're getting more productivity out of their acreage as well. And so what is good for the planet also is being proven to really benefit the grower's business as well. And so I didn't mention this, but we're the first beer to certify as carbon neutral in 2020 with Lib Tech, and a big part of those portions go to Indigo Ag that's helping to repay, part of the money we pay to be carbon neutral through offsets goes to growers so that they can fund a transition to regenerative agriculture, because these are not, maybe it's harder to get to, and so giving them resources to protect rural prosperity and then we make this transition is what's going to make it possible, and that's something that companies can be doing through their carbon neutral certification too.
Awesome. Is there anyone else has a question?
Yeah, so here in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan, at the same time we're seeing climate impacts already, especially with the winter, but we're also seeing the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. And I really want to say thank you, Joe, to the Birkebeiner Foundation for ending a relationship with Enbridge, which is responsible for a whole network of oil pipelines in our region. And so I wonder what else you guys in your organizations, or what ideas you have for all of us that we can do, not just to try to address the impacts, but really get at the accountability for this problem. And Katie, you mentioned those 100 corporations that are responsible for 70% of emissions is really intimidating, but those companies operate in the same world that we live in, and what can we do to, not just be trying to fight a greater uphill battle while the problem continues to get worse. Thanks.
And I'll just reiterate, vote and get everyone you know to vote and tell the story to voters, because at this point in time, I don't know that a lot of corporate leaders that are contributing the most are going to voluntarily take action, and so that's where I feel most empowered. And so, like, having athletes be a part of Protect Our Winters, like, I don't know, move to West Virginia and vote. I really just like making sure that, so that's one big thing to do. Of course, there's a lot of local action that people are taking.
Yeah, I think that I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I think that one of the things that everyone can do is everyone has a home, probably has a vehicle, probably works somewhere, and all of those entities, home, vehicle, place you work, they all have opportunities. And sometimes the opportunities are pretty obvious. We should recycle that versus putting it in a landfill. But sometimes they're not as obvious. And so sometimes just raising your hand and questioning things opens up a door, opens up some thought. Literally, you referenced, we had a sponsor that we were not comfortable with because of that situation, and it's challenging and painful at times, but you'd sure feel a lot better afterward. And so I think it's just literally kind of examining your life, examining where you work, examining your friends and your activities, and just take off what you can. So.
I have something I can add to that. One great advice that I got was when you think of the climate crisis as a whole, it's extremely overwhelming. And so really, the most impactful you can be is the closest closest to home, closest to who you are as a person, and whatever that may be. If you're a chef, or it doesn't matter, but honing in on what makes you, and that relation to climate. For me, I am a skier and farmer, so I wanted to do something. I decided to make a ski film that relates farming and agriculture, skiing to climate, and there was a lot of people that didn't like to see me traveling and skiing and whatnot, and that's life. But next thing we know, the Biden campaign was contacting our farm, King Orchards, and Joe Biden came out to the farm to talk to us about the challenges we face as farmers. So even these small impacts, I never would have thought skiing would have led to something like that. By making it personal, it can actually go far.
I have a very in the weeds sort of answer to that too. One of the things that we're looking at right now broadly is, of course, there's a transition happening in where we're getting energy, how we're powering our cars, and also electronics is driving things like the demand for rare earth minerals, copper. I'm sure many of you may be aware of the permit that was pulled for the boundary waters and the copper mining there. In Arizona, our economy is based upon the 5 C's: copper, cattle, cotton, and all these other things. But that's going to be, I would say, the next, looking down 10 years, 15 years down the road, things like boundary waters. In our backyard, there's a thing called oak flat. Those are going to become more common, but it's going to be more based on mineral extraction. And what do you do? What can we do there? There's things like right to repair laws for our electronics. Many of our electronics are single use. New iPhone comes out, you can't, you're kind of stuck, you're bricked at a certain point. There's laws in other parts of the world that basically mandate that we have the ability to update and upgrade our phones, or whatever it may be, and that reduces that consumption. That's a huge one. The other one that I think might be a little bit more challenging with COVID is ensuring that our public transportation systems, especially in cities, are continuing to be supported, because that's taking a hit right now. So yeah, in the weeds. There's a question over here.
While we're moving over there, I'll just really quickly add, in Fort Collins, where we live, a group of citizens got together and petitioned the city council to commit to 100% renewable electricity. We came in as a business voice against the chamber and fought them hard and said, this is good for our business. It's not just like a pie-in-the-sky idea, and a lot of other people spoke up for it as well. And our city council ended up committing our utility to 100% renewable electricity, and that was all a citizen-initiated movement that has really benefiting all of us. So there's a lot of local level action that can happen at the utility level too.
Thank you all for, this is such a great combination of events and the soil and business. I'm a Birkie skier. I've skied 40 Birkies, and working with Joe now on Birkie Green, and it's a lot slower after 40 years. But I want to say 5 years ago, the Birkie was canceled, and we did a booth up there with our Cool Planet skiers. We had 512 letters written to members of Congress urging them to take action. Now we're working with the Citizens Climate Lobby to do a carbon fee and dividend, put a price on carbon, give the money back as a monthly dividend, but we need Republicans and Democrats to work together to get this message. So I'm saying to all of us, build relationships with your school board, with your city council, with the local people, because trickling up is a lot more powerful than trying to get Biden's Build Back Better. They're struggling with that. They need to hear from local leaders, and that's actually all of us.
I was going to come back to recycling and make an analogy to the vaccinations, the vaccine requirements that I guess it's the one thing that unites everyone who's here tonight. We all have friends and family who have their odd opinions, and there are people all around us who have them. So with recycling, it seems to me that there are huge swaths of people who just choose to crap all over our recycling options. Private residences, but probably a lot more so corporations, bars and restaurants, and just really all corporations. And my question to the panel is, playing off of these vaccine requirements, which were mandated by our government because they had to be, because human beings don't make responsible decisions most of the time. That's why we really, we wouldn't need to have the government mandating things if we did. So I'm wondering what you all think about recycling as a mandate. Is there something about that that's wrong? Being forced to care for the environment when it goes against your own free will choices. I mean, suppose corporations were ordered to recycle when they had the reasonable option of doing that. What do you all think about that?
Yeah, well, in other parts of the world, there is extended producer responsibility, which makes the corporations be accountable for what happens to their products at the end of their life. And if they are ending up going in the trash, then the corporations have to pay for systems that capture them and bring them back into a circular economy. And so that's actually something that's being considered in the United States and is gaining more momentum. Examples like that do exist in the U.S. where we have bottle deposits or container deposits, right? There's some type of incentive program that folks are required to comply with. But I think when it comes to recycling right now, it's I'll just say I'm a really big fan of local rights, and being able to adapt to where you live and what matters to you. And there's certain things that affect us all, like climate, right, or materials and waste. And so in the United States, there's different recycling mandates and codes and regulations at every city and county level. There's thousands of them across the nation. And it actually restricts the free market because there's so many regulatory barriers at every zip code. It restricts the free markets to create solutions that are very profitable for collecting and reusing materials. And so yeah, I think that there are examples of national guidances and regulations around materials collection and recycling that work really, really well and create a lot of business opportunity and prosperity in other countries. And the United States, has a lot to learn from that. So in any case, I think, when we think about what we step up and speak about as a business when it comes to government regulation, we look at what's something that, is beyond our own individual impact to make that individual decision. And if it's something that impacts all of us, like climate issues, for example, and recycling is a big part of that, then we're going to speak up and suggest that there's some type of coordination and accountability system that helps those decisions be made in a way that's more consistent with both environmental health but also financial prosperity at large.
I would just kind of like to add on to what Pete is saying. What I personally would like to see more than the recycle mandate is mandates for corporations to create a product and infrastructure that makes it easy on an individual to get rid of this trash and make sure it gets in the right places. So we don't have to mandate us doing it. It should be on the people creating it and just systems that make it easier for everyone. So it's a no-brainer. It's easy.
Thank you everyone for coming out, and we'll give a round of applause for our panel. One last announcement is that there is a giveaway outside of really cool products, things that I think entire co-branded things, with a suggested donation to protect our winners. So you can check that outside. That's at the booth. I think there's a house surfer and there's some other cool stuff out there. So be sure to check that out. But thank you everyone for coming.